Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Leadership Lounge with Marlowe Foster. Joining us today is not only a tremendous leader, but my friend, Bob Gfeller. Bob currently serves as Executive Director for the Children's Institute for Pediatric Trauma. The phrase dynamic leader is often overused, but this guy is the real deal. Bob has a wealth of experience working in Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit businesses. He holds expertise in marketing, merchandising, strategy, and customer experience, having honed his skills at the likes of Coca-Cola, Nabisco, Colgate-Palmolive, and Lowe's Home Improvement. Bob has held executive vice president positions both at Lowe's Home Improvement and Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. Bob's passion for better patient care is personal. The Matthew Gfeller Foundation, a 501c3 organization, was founded in 2008 in honor of his son Matthew, who died at age 15 after he sustained a traumatic brain injury playing football for Reynolds High School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The Matthew Gfeller Foundation was retired in 2018, having achieved its mission. However, work continues at the TBI Research Center at UNC Chapel Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to kick back on the Leadership Lounge with Marlowe Foster. So, Bob, I want to thank you for joining us today in the lounge. And I really want to spend most of the day focused on the Matthew Gfeller Foundation and your work at the Children's Institute. But we would do our listeners a disservice if we didn't talk a little bit about your experience in Fortune 500 companies and your career. You have done so much. You have so much experience. You've been an EVP for merchandising. You've focused on customer experience at Lowe's companies. The Leadership Lounge is all about leadership. Can you share just some of the things that you've learned over the course of your career and some key learnings around leadership?
Marlo, I'm happy to do that. Happy to share some thoughts for you on leadership. I'm honored to be on your show and have the ability to share some of my thoughts with your audience. As you said, I had like 30 something years as it related to working in large corporations with large teams, matrixed organizations, complicated individuals. And there are three things for me that kind of define my leadership style. And, maybe it'll help some of your audience. So the first one is empathy. I grew up in New York. I grew up in the Bronx, and my grandparents lived in the apartment building we lived in. And my grandfather was a letter carrier, they called it back then, a mailman for 35 years. And he used to teach me all the time about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, right? And taking everything with that lens on it. And I have worked very hard my whole career to try to do that. So empathy is number one. Number two to me is perseverance. You, I, and a lot of folks in your audience are sometimes sitting in an awkward seat. Maybe they don't have a good leader. Maybe they're struggling in their career. Maybe they're struggling with something at home. You've got to be able to persevere through things that are difficult. And I've had a lot of difficult things in my life, in our family's life. And so I think if people can just tough it out, I generally think perseverance and a view to the long haul can help you out without a doubt. And then the last thing is integrity. Again, you and I, we've worked with a lot of people that might be a little light on integrity. You cannot be light on integrity and be a leader. It's impossible. And the reason why it's impossible is you will not be authentic. People will not believe you. Frankly, you won't even come across as believable. So I think a very key lesson for leadership is, are you truthful? Are you truthful with yourself? Are you truthful with your people? Do they know where they stand? I mean, think about how many people got a surprise in their life, in their career. You don't want that to happen. So empathy, perseverance, integrity, those to me are critical.
So, all right, so I want to pick up on that point of perseverance and challenges in your life, and let's go to 2008. So, in 2008, you lost your son. And I read some articles published in the Winston-Salem Journal where it said, your son lost his life on a routine football play. So as a father losing their son, I know, hey, that can't, you don't consider it a routine football play, but talk to us about kind of, how you felt at that time, and then, as we work our way into discussion about the Matthew Gfeller Foundation, kind of how you summoned the courage to start that foundation in his honor.
Sure. So 2008, August 22nd, Matthew's at R.J. Reynolds High School as a sophomore, and he makes the varsity football team, and he's out of his cleats, excited. He can't wait. Well, anyway, he ends up starting. He starts both ways. He starts at guard and at line. So his life is nirvana. That's all he wanted to do, was play football and all that good stuff. But what happened was, in the third quarter of the game, he's playing linebacker, and if you know football, and a lot of your audience probably knows football, there's a play on offense called a trap. And what happens is a guard or tackle will pull across the line, trap block down, and the running back will come kind of right behind him. Mm-hmm. And what happened was Matthew didn't. They were running all night long, but on this play, he did not see what was happening. He did not see the lineman coming. And yes, what happened was a routine block, but the trouble was it was pretty much a head-to-head collision between the blocker and Matt. And looking at the film, you can see Matthew sees it at the last split second. So long story is he's unconscious. That was, I don't know, 9 or 10 o'clock. And yeah, he died 2 days later. He had what's called a subdural hematoma. He had a major brain bleed and never woke up.
So you go through this, you observe this, you lose your son, and then you say, I'm going to start a foundation. How do you do that? I think about.
So here's what happened. Let me tell you what happened. So what happens was he goes down on the field, and obviously I go down on the field because I realize he's got his brother's old cleats on. Mm-hmm. And Matthew and I were going to go shopping for cleats the next day. Mm-hmm. So why do I know it's Matthew on the ground? I can't tell it's him, but the cleats are filled with tape. You have to tape them together. So anyway, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Matt. Down I go. And a lot of our friends came down on the field because they were physicians. Mm-hmm. So what happened immediately in the situation is a lot of our friends in our community, Marlowe, are the ones who lifted us up, literally from the minute it happened. Mm-hmm. So, we're at the hospital, and I'm talking about hundreds of people. We wake up. We don't wake up. We don't go to bed, but it comes the next morning, and the entire R.J. Reynolds High School is below us out the window in the parking lot at the hospital. So what happened was, through the journey of pain, the community are the ones who motivated us to go do good. And Lisa, my wife, Matthew's mom, she's the one who said, the question is not why us, the question is what now? And so that's how we got to the foundation, because as we were going through the next week and the funeral and all that terrible stuff, and frankly, trying to understand what happened, people were giving money to the Winston-Salem Foundation in Matthew's honor. So the foundation came to us and said, hey, what do you want us to do? And we said, well, we need to set up a scholarship. And that's what started the Matthew Gfeller Foundation kind of process. It happened immediately. And it just continued on through a decade with all the blocking and tackling clinics we did, the donut run that raised the money. All the things we did were always supported and engaged in the community.
And so, all right, you look at that experience, you take your son's death, you do great work through the foundation, you do educational work. Talk to us about kind of, so your son passes away. There's so much scrutiny of football right now, head trauma. And that, what is your view of the sport in relation to what happened to your son, and and then the work of the foundation? And I just, I can't imagine. How do you think about it all? That's a lot.
No, I got you. And it's a lot easier to talk about 10 years later than it was at that point. So at that point, we're in 2008. And what's happening in 2008 is the NFL is beginning to be under scrutiny. You start the concussion wave is growing. It's right at that point in time. And so what happened with Matthew kind of catapulted us into this whole space of knowledge around youth sports concussion, governing sports bodies, equipment, techniques, coaching, education. I mean, away you go. So the foundation, the work of the foundation, which was the engine of everything we did, the main point of the Matthew Gfeller Foundation for that decade was to educate students and parents and coaches and trainers on what was in the world to learn around sports-related head trauma. So that's really, we centered everything around that. And then the Children's Institute that you mentioned early on also was formed in 2008, and we ended up partnering on all kinds of things. The Children's Institute is based at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. The Matthew Gfeller Sport-Related Traumatic Brain Injury Research Center is anchored at UNC Chapel Hill. And around the country, there's a handful of other, what you might call centers, that all collaborate to move this work forward. And so it took from about 2008 to probably close to 2011 for all of that to start to take shape. But from then on, we've kind of been plowing it together. And there are experts at Boston University, University of Michigan, there at University of Colorado. And what you find in medical research and training is they work together.
All right.
And so, how does it happen? It was people connecting with people and having the right approach to try to do good.
So you've got what's going on at Chapel Hill in terms of the Institute. You look back on everything you did with the foundation. I mean, what are you most proud of out of all of that and of all of those circumstances?
Wow. Well, I will say I'm super proud of our family. If you study the statistics on losing a child, they're not good. Marriages break up. Siblings have tremendous issues. And so, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I'm proud of my wife, Lisa. I'm proud of our children, Robbie and Haley. They've gone on. They went to college. They graduated. I mean, the Friday night Matthew was injured was Robbie's first Friday night as a freshman at UNC. So how would you like to have your father show up at your door at 4 a.m. and say, you got to come home? And how would you like to get a text message from an old friend in the stands that says, your brother's out? So I'm just saying, there's so tremendous pride in that. Number one. Number two, tremendous pride in the people who do the work. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. As we raised money, all these organizations to do education and to do research and to do all this work to try to educate players, parents, trainers, coaches, on risk, prevention, and care. It's the people in the trenches that are the ones that have taken and pushed science so much further. I mean, think about where we are 10 years ago. We got better helmets, which number one, a helmet can't prevent a concussion. They were built to prevent skull fracture, but there are a lot better helmets in deflecting force. Right? That's what concussion is, force. So you deflect G-force, you're a lot safer. Shoulder pads, blocking techniques, tackling techniques, and we're way beyond football now. Way beyond football. We're into mouthpieces for soccer. The U.S. Soccer Association last year passed the guideline, no heading below the age of 16. So what's happening is the other sports, Marlowe, are also trying to protect the kids, trying to put forth policies, guidelines, equipment, and techniques that will reduce youth sport head injury. And the other thing that's happened in the decade is there's a heck of a lot more reporting on concussion. And you might say, well, God, that can't be good because no, it is good because what we didn't know, we didn't know a decade ago.
Right.
Now we know a lot more about youth sport head injury, how to treat it, how to get kids back into school, how to get kids back on the field. You know, the notion of hey, you got a dinger, why don't you go take a little salt and head back on the field?
Right.
That's not happening as much anymore, and that's
Right.
good. That's
Right.
progress.
Yeah. So, and I want to get to what the future looks like for Bob Gfeller, but just for our listeners, can you uh, just kind of talk to us quickly about the difference with kind of hits and head trauma and that sort of thing for a young adult or a young person versus an older adult, and kind of, because I know there's also a lot of you hear these studies where lots of times when the difficulty of when you get older in life is really based on the hits you took when you were young versus those as an older adult. Can you share some of your learnings through
Sure.
the? Mm-hmm.
So one of the mantras at the Children's Institute, which deals in pediatric trauma, which is the kind of the holistic space of severe injury to children, is the notion that children are not small adults.
Right.
Okay, children are not small adults, and what that means is children's bones are not adults' bones, just smaller. Children's brains are not adult brains, just smaller. So, as an example, if you're a 15-year-old, Matt was 15, okay, the brain inside of his skull at that time in your life is not fully filling, in layman's terms, is not fully filling your skull.
Mm-hmm.
So if your head takes a hit and it creates a lateral force that turns your head rapidly to the side, your brain inside that skull is not moving with your skull because there's space between your brain and the skull, and that's where you get a tear.
Okay.
So as an example, that's what happened to Matt.
Mm-hmm.
You get a tear, you get a bleed. So my point is that when you look at what's happening to 8-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 60-year-olds, to your point, is very different based on where you are aging and how the body ages and how the brain ages. So the other example is, and there's a lot of theory out there about CTE, right? Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I can't even talk about the experts, all that they know, but the theory is that a lot of head trauma early on can lead to brain and thinking and functional issues later on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Marlowe, there's not enough science. There's not enough research yet completed to tie all these things together. I tell people the research we're funding today is going to help my grandkids.
Right.
That's how much knowledge has to be developed. One of the fundamental questions parents ask, right? You got kids, are, hey, if I let my kid play 8 years of field hockey or 8 years of lacrosse, and they take 5 concussions on, am I impacting their brain function later in their life? We don't know.
Right.
We're studying it.
Right.
Lots of scientists are studying it, but it's going to take a long time to answer that question.
Yeah. No. I mean, just to be honest, I tell my kids. I mean, my son Noah's 11, my daughter Christian's 12. Christian swims and cheers, and Noah does karate. Now, I mean, Noah will take some hits to his head, sparring and that sort of thing. And quite frankly, that's somewhat of a concern. They wear the best equipment, but we still don't know. We don't know what the long-term impact is going to be. So,
don't know.
So
I'll tell you one thing.
Yeah.
Another thing about cheerleading for you. You think about girls. When people think about girls and girls sports, they think, oh, there's no real concussion risk for girls. One of the highest concussion risks in girls sports are the flyers in cheerleading.
Okay.
The ones who fly. Why? Because they get caught. They get dropped. They jerk their necks.
Right.
So even cheerleading, which people might say, well, how could there be a concussion in cheerleading? It's there.
Well, and in 7th grade, my daughter actually is the base, so she catches the flyers.
There you go.
And so if she's not perfect, she's actually going to get a concussion because the flyers come down on her. So, Bob, you've had an amazing career. an amazing career. And whenever, I'm not a journalist, but the podcast, I consider myself somewhat of a journalist, and the mantra, never be a fan. I have to say, I am an absolute fan of yours. You are one of the most just brilliant, amazing, both with the technical. It's hard to find someone who's great with the technical. So I know back from our days at Lowe's, you could look at a spreadsheet, you could look at sales, you could do this and that, you could do the analysis, and then you could also talk about the latest marketing campaign. And to find someone with that ability, and on top of that, the ability to communicate effectively, to kind of mesh all of those things together, is truly a rarity. And it's been great to know you and to work with you and to follow your leadership. So, when you look back on everything you've done up to this point, what do you think about your career? What are you most proud of? You've done so much. It's kind of like, wow.
Well, those are very nice compliments. I faked it pretty good, didn't I? Wow, no, that's very, very kind. It's been, my career has been a great run. It's funny, when one chapter closed, the other one opened, and there was always a person there to bridge me from one to the next, which I thought was really, really kind of spiritual. Mm-hmm. When I went from Colgate to Nabisco, I went because somebody said, you got to go. When I went from Nabisco to Coke, I went because somebody said, hey, you got to come down here. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Lowe. It's kind of funny. Mm-hmm. But the one thing, for me, I don't remember all the meetings. I don't remember all the PowerPoints, right? I don't remember all the arguments. I don't remember all the politics, but I do remember the people that I put in position to succeed. Mm-hmm. That for me is it. I can go all the way back to my earliest jobs where I was blessed with able to lead and train people. Mm-hmm. And I can remember when I moved from one role to the next, who was the backfill, why they were the backfill, and how well that they did. Mm-hmm. And I don't, it's not even work. That's why I enjoyed business so much, is because I had an opportunity to see people stretch, grow, and advance.
So, again, amazing career. And it's kind of, we bring this conversation to a close. And you talked a lot about your tenets as a leader, your work experience. Is there one key thing or one key way you want to be remembered as a leader in all that you've done, what you want people to say about Bob Gfeller 50 years from now, 70 years from now? What do you think about?
I do, and how you do a lot of people have the challenge of doing the personal mission statement, and mm-hmm. people, they just sweat that, man, and they just hate that exercise, right? It's like, I can't do this. I absolutely hate this. I don't want a mission statement. I'm running the other way. Okay, for me, you go through life, you have ups, you have downs. Obviously losing Matthew was crushing, right? Having a prosperous and fun and crazy careers is a great upper. Mm. And for me, what I try to do every day is to make others better. Mm-hmm. That's 3 words. Mm-hmm. Make others better. If I can filter my behavior, my thinking, my activity through that, I'm all good.
Hmm. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us today in the lounge, and we look forward to continue to track your success. I know that you're going to continue to do great things, and it's good to reconnect with you, my friend.
Absolutely awesome. Thanks, Marlowe. I'm honored to be on your show. I really am. And keep doing what you're doing. It's beautiful. Wonderful. Good luck to you and your family.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.